Welcome back. I've been diving deep into a really captivating set of materials, and I can't wait to break it all down with you. It's all about habits, and honestly, I'm seeing habits everywhere now.
Well, you've got a fascinating collection here. Research papers, business anecdotes, personal stories, military strategy, all linked by this thread of habit science.
It's wild, right? And what's crazy is, even though the sources come from such different places, there are these recurring themes, these core principles about habits that keep popping up.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. We're going to extract the most insightful, the most surprising takeaways from all this material and really try to make sense of how habits work, why they have such a grip on us, and most importantly, how we can use this knowledge to make real changes in our own lives.
Like practical stuff, not just theory. It's about gaining this deeper understanding that lets you take control of your habits, not the other way around. Like that major you mentioned, who called it, what was it, a flashlight and a crowbar?
Precisely. A flashlight to illuminate the mechanisms and a crowbar to pry open those deeply ingrained patterns. We'll be exploring some pretty incredible stories along the way.
Oh, yeah. How a major in Kufa used habit psychology to keep the peace. Why a man with amnesia could still whip up breakfast without a hitch. And, I got to mention this, how Target seems to know you're pregnant before you do.
Right, those are some captivating cases. And they all hinge on this fundamental unit of habit, what researchers at MIT famously called the habit loop.
Okay, the habit loop. I feel like I've heard that term thrown around, but could you break it down for us?
Sure. The habit loop is essentially a three-part cycle: cue, routine, reward, wired into our brains. Think of it as a neurological shortcut.
Cue, routine, reward. I think I'm getting it, but how does that play out in our brains? Like, what's actually happening?
Well, imagine that classic experiment with a rat in a maze. When the rat hears the click at the start, that's the cue, there's this spike in brain activity, like the brain is anticipating something.
Okay, the click gets the rat's attention. What happens next?
Then comes the routine, the behavior itself, the rat running through the maze, and at the end, it gets their reward, maybe some delicious food.
The payoff. So it's like our brains are always looking for those triggers, those cues, and once they spot one, they launch into this automatic sequence because they're expecting that reward at the end.
Exactly. And the driving force behind all this is efficiency. Brains love to conserve energy, and habits are basically the ultimate energy savers. Once a behavior is repeated and consistently leads to a reward, our brains start to automate it. It becomes this pre-programmed sequence thanks to a little area called the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia. And I remember reading that damage to this area can have some pretty drastic effects.
Oh yeah, when the basal ganglia are damaged, things get really difficult. Simple actions like taking a step or even just choosing what to drink become incredibly hard. It's like this mental gridlock.
Wow, that's intense.
And there's this other interesting aspect. People with basal ganglia damage also struggle to filter out unimportant information. There are studies showing they have a hard time recognizing faces because they can't zero in on the key features.
So they get overwhelmed by all the details.
Right. And it highlights how much we rely on these unconscious habits for everyday tasks. We don't have to constantly think about every little step of tying our shoes or driving a car because habits take care of it.
It makes you realize how much is happening beneath the surface. And speaking of that, there's the amazing case of Eugene, the man with severe memory loss. His story really stood out in the material.
Eugene's case is a powerful demonstration of how deeply rooted habits can be. Despite his profound amnesia, he could still perform these complex routines, cooking bacon and eggs perfectly every time, finding his way home without even knowing his address.
And he did all that without consciously remembering any of it.
Exactly. He could even steer conversations towards familiar topics, like his interest in satellites, all while having no recollection of past interactions. It's a stark contrast to someone like HM, who, as we read, couldn't form new memories after his surgery. He was constantly living in the present moment.
Stuck in a perpetual now. But Eugene had this whole repertoire of habits, these procedural memories, still intact even with his memory impairment.
And that's exactly what Larry Squire's research confirmed. Habits can exist entirely outside of our conscious declarative memory. So even if we don't consciously remember performing an action, the habitual pattern can still be running in the background.
It's like a separate operating system, running those automatic programs.
Right.
So we've got this habit loop cue, routine, reward, driven by the brain's need for efficiency and handled largely outside of our awareness. But what makes us actually want to do the routine when we encounter the cue?
That's where craving comes in. The reward doesn't just provide immediate satisfaction, it also creates this anticipation, this desire to experience that feeling again. Remember the monkey, Julio? When he got his juice reward, his brain lit up with this clear, I got a reward signal. And as this pattern repeated, his brain started anticipating that reward as soon as the cue appeared.
So the reward is like the hook. It creates the craving, and that craving becomes the driving force of the whole habit loop.
Precisely. And strong habits can lead to incredibly intense cravings. We see this in people with substance dependencies and compulsive eating. As those cravings get deeply ingrained, there are actual neurological changes in the brain. It's like this initial wanting morphs into an obsessive craving that can really take over.
It's a little scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it kind of explains why it can be so hard to break bad habits, even when we know they're not good for us.
Absolutely. But it also helps us understand how good habits take root. Think about exercise. It can be a struggle to get started, but people who stick with it often talk about craving that feeling they get after a workout.
That runner's high, or that sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. The initial motivation might be external, wanting to get in shape or lose weight, but the habit often solidifies because of the craving for that specific reward.
So craving is key to both forming habits and understanding why some become so entrenched. You know, the story of Pepsodent really brought this home for me.
Ah, yes, Claude Hopkins, a brilliant marketer who understood this craving principle instinctively. Now, interestingly, Pepsodent wasn't actually better at cleaning teeth than other toothpastes at the time. In fact, many dental experts thought most toothpastes were pretty useless back then. But Hopkins was a master at cultivating a craving.
What did he do?
He focused on this idea of film on teeth, associating it with a desirable outcome, a beautiful smile. Then he introduced a tangible cue, that slightly rough feeling on your teeth after brushing.
I remember that feeling from when I was a kid.
Right, and that feeling became linked to the reward, a clean mouth, and the distinctive tingle of Pepsodent. It wasn't about superior cleaning power. It was about creating this perception of efficacy, and more importantly, a craving for that specific sensation.
Like a psychological trick. And then there's the opposite example, Febrez's early struggles.
That's another great illustration of how crucial it is to get the reward right. At first, Procter & Gamble marketed Febreze as a solution for eliminating bad odors. The cue were bad smells. The reward was their removal. It sounds logical, right?
Yeah, totally. Get rid of the stink.
But the problem was, who wants to admit their house stinks? They weren't tapping into a strong inherent craving.
So it was a solution to a problem people didn't want to acknowledge they had.
Exactly. The turning point for Febreze came when they shifted focus. Instead of eliminating bad smells, they started emphasizing the pleasant, fresh scent that Febreze left behind. They created a craving for that feeling of cleanliness and freshness after a room was already clean.
So the reward became something positive, something to actively desire, rather than just the absence of something negative.
Precisely. And this idea of engineering cravings extends to products where the added element has no real functional benefit. Think about the foaming action of shampoo.
Oh, yeah, all those bubbles.
Shampoo doesn't really need to foam to clean your hair effectively, but manufacturers include those foaming agents because that's what consumers have come to expect. The lather provides a sensory reward, reinforcing the habit of using shampoo.
Yeah, it's not just shampoo, right? Laundry detergent, toothpaste, they all have those extra suds.
Right. It's about tapping into our ingrained expectations and satisfying them with a perceived reward, even if it doesn't actually add anything to the product's effectiveness. So it all comes down to understanding what our brains are anticipating and ultimately craving.
It's like hacking our own biology. Okay, so we've got a good handle on how habits form, the loop, and the power of craving. But what about breaking bad habits? The material presented a specific framework for that.
Yes. The framework for intentionally changing habits involves 4 steps. Identify the routine, experiment with rewards, isolate the cue, and have a plan.
Okay, let's go through them one by one. First, identify the routine. That seems pretty simple. It's about figuring out the exact behavior you want to change.
Right. Be as specific as possible. What are you doing? When does it happen? Where are you? What are the details of the behavior itself?
Got it. So once you've pinpointed the routine, what's next?
Then you move on to step 2, experimenting with rewards. This is about uncovering the real need or desire that the habit is fulfilling. It's like detective work.
How do you go about experimenting with rewards?
Well, take the example you mentioned earlier, that afternoon cookie craving. Instead of automatically reaching for a cookie when that craving hits, try substituting it with something else that might provide a similar satisfaction. Maybe a short walk, a chat with a colleague, a different kind of snack. After each alternative, take a moment to reflect. Did you still crave the cookie? Did the alternative truly satisfy you? This helps you figure out if you're actually hungry or if you're craving something else entirely: distraction, social connection, a mental break.
Like a process of elimination to pinpoint the true reward. Makes sense. Okay, step 3. Isolate the cue. What's the best way to identify those habit triggers?
It's all about becoming a keen observer of the circumstances surrounding the habit. Whenever that urge kicks in, make a mental note of 5 things: where you are, the time of day, how you're feeling emotionally, who else is around, and what you were doing right before the urge hit.
Like keeping a habit journal in your head.
Exactly. And as you do this consistently, you'll start to see patterns. You might discover that the cue is always a certain time of day, a particular location, or a specific emotional state like boredom or stress.
Like becoming a detective of your own behavior. Okay, last step. Have a plan. What does this involve?
Once you've figured out the cue and the real reward driving the habit, it's time to create a new, intentional routine to insert when that cue pops up. It's like creating a pre-programmed response.
Override the old program with a new one.
Precisely. So if you discover your afternoon cookie craving is triggered by the clock hitting 3:30 p.m. and the real reward is a need for social interaction, your plan might be to get up at 3:30 and chat with a coworker instead of heading for the cookies.
So it's about redirecting the response, not suppressing the craving itself. This framework is really helpful, actually. Now, the material also talked about willpower and the idea that it's not unlimited.
That's a crucial point. Remember that experiment with cookies and radishes. The students who had to resist the cookies and eat radishes ended up giving up on a challenging puzzle task much sooner than those who got to enjoy the cookies. It suggests that willpower is like a muscle that can get tired.
So if you're using up all your willpower resisting that donut in the morning, you might be more likely to cave to a craving later in the day.
Exactly. And this has implications for how organizations try to foster good habits. Starbucks, for example, realized that their customer service depended on employees exercising self-control. But instead of just hoping their employees had tons of willpower, they built systems and routines to make it easier for them to handle customer interactions.
So it wasn't about individual willpower. It was about building a supportive environment that encouraged the desired behavior.
Right. And speaking of support, the material also highlighted the importance of belief and community in making lasting habit changes.
Yeah, that really resonated with me. It's like knowing you're not alone in this makes a huge difference.
It does. Understanding how habits work and having a plan is great, but real change often hinges on believing that change is actually possible, and being part of a group can make that belief so much stronger. Think about support groups for quitting smoking or losing weight.
Yeah, those shared experiences and the sense of accountability can be so powerful.
Exactly. It's like drawing strength from the collective belief of the group. The research even suggests that your chances of successfully changing a habit skyrocket when you commit to it as part of a group.
So it's not just about individual effort. It's about tapping into the power of community. This idea of shared belief also connects to the concept of keystone habits, which you mentioned before. Could you explain those a bit more?
Sure. Keystone habits are these foundational habits that set off a chain reaction, influencing and changing other habits. They have this ripple effect, like Paul O'Neill at Alcoa. He was obsessed with worker safety.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about him. But how did that become a keystone habit that transformed the entire company?
O'Neill believed that if he could change the habits around safety, it would create positive change throughout the entire company culture. And he was right. By focusing on minimizing worker injuries, he unintentionally triggered improvements in communication, problem solving, and accountability.
So he focused on one key area, and that led to all these other positive changes.
Exactly. It's like dominoes falling. And keystone habits often lead to what the material called small wins.
Those early successes that build momentum.
Precisely. Those small wins create a sense of optimism and belief that further change is possible. It's like a positive feedback loop. Another great example is Michael Phelps and his meticulous pre-race routine.
What was so special about his routine?
His coach, Bob Bowman, knew that Phelps needed more than just physical talent. He needed ways to manage his anxiety. So they developed this super detailed pre-race, routine-specific stretches, warm-up exercises, mental visualization techniques. It became this anchor for him, providing a sense of control in the high-pressure world of competitive swimming. And it was so ingrained that even when his goggles filled with water during an Olympic final, he didn't panic. He stuck to his routine, counted his strokes, stayed focused, and won the gold medal.
That's an amazing testament to the power of routine. Now, the material also explored how habits work on a larger scale in organizations and societies. It's not just an individual thing.
Right. Nelson and Winter's work on organizational routines shows that companies are often driven more by ingrained habits than by conscious decisions. Like that example of the red cardigan always showing up in the company's catalog. It might seem like a deliberate marketing choice, but it could actually be the result of a bunch of unconscious habits converging.
So like a bunch of little decisions made on autopilot, all leading to this one outcome.
Exactly. And these organizational habits can create a kind of equilibrium, a truce between the different departments, as Material called it.
But as we saw with Rhode Island Hospital, those truces can be fragile, right?
Absolutely. Those ingrained routines, especially without clear communication, can be a recipe for disaster. In the hospital's case, it led to those repeated surgical errors. It seems like it often takes a major shock or crisis to disrupt these deeply ingrained habits and make way for new ones.
Yeah, like a wake-up call.
Right. Crises create this sense of urgency, making people more open to change. Look at NASA after the Challenger disaster, or the airline industry after Tenerife. Those events forced them to overhaul their safety protocols. Even at Rhode Island Hospital, the tragic errors eventually led to the adoption of those safety checklists.
So sometimes it takes a huge shakeup to break those rigid habits. And then the discussion shifted to societal habits, using the Montgomery bus boycott as an example.
It's fascinating how Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat sparked such a widespread movement. And it's because she was deeply embedded in her community. Her strong ties were crucial in mobilizing the initial protest.
Which brings us to those concepts of weak ties and strong ties.
Exactly. While strong ties, like friendships and activist networks, provided the initial spark, weak ties, those connections with acquaintances and more distant contacts, were key to spreading the word and getting more people involved. Weak ties bridge different social circles.
So it was this combination of strong ties for the core and weak ties for outreach.
Right. And McAdams' research on Freedom Summer volunteers showed that having strong ties to activist groups was a big predictor of who actually went to Mississippi to participate in that dangerous work. They had that pre-existing community for support. And then there's Martin Luther King Jr. His leadership in the boycott wasn't just about logistics. He was cultivating new social habits, a new sense of identity.
Awesome.
He gave people this powerful vision of dignity and justice that resonated with them. And by promoting nonviolent resistance and fostering the sense of shared purpose, he empowered people to act collectively. It wasn't just about following orders, it became a way of life.
So he changed their habits of thought and action.
And finally, we have William James's observation that life is basically a mass of habits.
It's a sobering thought, but his own struggle with procrastination and his deliberate effort to build better habits offers a lot of hope.
Absolutely. He dedicated himself to creating new habits, meticulously tracking his progress. It wasn't a magical overnight transformation. It was about consistent, intentional effort.
And through that effort, he experienced what he called a rebirth of the moral life. He embraced the power of conscious choice. It's a powerful reminder that we're not slaves to our habits. We can change. So in this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. The habit loop, the power of craving, the framework for changing habits, the influence of belief in community, and the impact of keystone habits.
And hopefully you, the listener, have gained some valuable insights from this exploration. It's not just about understanding habits. It's about equipping yourself with the tools to analyze and change your own habits.
It's about taking control.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, try to identify just one habit in your own life and look at it with fresh eyes. What are the cues? What's the real reward? What small experiment could you try to better understand that habit loop?
This deep dive is really just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about habits and how they shape our lives.
And by understanding these mechanisms, we gain the power to shape our own destinies.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.
Take care.